Well, hello everybody. My name is Ron Lisle. I am a professional iOS developer, but an avid IoT enthusiast and hobbyist. So, I absolutely love this stuff. This is some of the stuff I've tinkered with and put together. I do have a bit of an electronics background, but I don't do any of that professionally. I'm envious of you guys that do get to do the electronics professionally or the IoT firmware and that sort of thing. I enjoy the heck out of doing it. My wife and I live full-time in an RV, and there's some very cool aspects of that. One is that I've got 12 volts everywhere, and all of my lighting and everything is 12 volts, which is very easy to deal with for automation and whatnot. I don't have to mess with the 120 volts and all that other nasty stuff. So I'm in the process of trying to automate as much as possible, and it requires a lot of custom circuitry because there isn't a lot of available IoT hardware out there, home automation hardware, that isn't for 120 volts kind of thing. But the good news is it's very easy to do, a simple MOSFET power transistor and so forth. So that got me into it, and I started looking at things like building my own circuit boards, and now out of China, you can build a set of circuit boards for about $1 a piece. So it really got to where it just lit my fire. It's like, man, I dreamed of this day when you'd be able to build these circuits for under $10. In fact, some of the circuits I built are down under $5. Ordering the parts out of China by slow boat and wait for it to hit you and so forth. So I'm probably singing to the choir here because y'all are probably aware of this, but 7 years ago, when I got back into electronics, I was just stunned at how amazingly powerful and inexpensive all of these parts are. You can go out and you can buy a box of different sensors just to experiment with, like 40 different types of sensors in a box for like 30 bucks. So it was like, oh, this is cool. So I just started playing with the stuff. And so I'll go from here, and we'll talk a little bit about what I'm doing in my RV. I got to a point where I realized that some of what I'm doing, especially on the more professional side of my skills, might be applicable to other folks and be able to share it. But first, I want to tell a story. So there I was. I had been working on my latest IoT project, and I'd gotten the computer set up to where the computer could talk to the internet then talked to into a device, and the device then could control a 12-volt light bulb. So I was pretty excited about it, and I developed an iPhone app that would communicate then with it. So this is my wife, Shelley. I called her in. I said, Shelley, you're not going to believe it. This is so cool. I built this thing, and I've got this iPhone app now. And just picture that you are sitting down in the chair right there. And you're reading a book, but it's getting dark outside. And now the wall switch is way over there. So you don't want to have to get up and go over there to turn the light on. So instead, look, I've set it up so that you can pull your iPhone out and start it up and then launch over to my app here, and you can launch the app and then scroll down to the device and then you select the device, and then you can tell it to turn on. Well, in the meantime, I looked over, she'd gotten up, she flipped the switch, and she's grinning at me. And it's that sort of knowing grin that usually is accompanied with the words, oh, bless your heart. So I realized, well, I'm excited about this. I love all of the cool stuff that went into it, but it's not really something that would excite anybody other than for the fact of all the technology. So I realized, okay, I got to go back to the drawing board a little bit. It was a little funny that I'm a big fan of the Big Bang Theory, and I suppose most of you are. They had an episode that describes exactly how I feel about this stuff.
Okay. The X10s are online.
Gentlemen, I am now about to send a signal from this laptop through our local ISP, racing down fiber optic cable at the speed of light to San Francisco, bouncing off a satellite in geosynchronous orbit to Lisbon, Portugal.
This is almost exactly me trying to sell her.
Transatlantic cables terminating in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and transferred across the continent via microwave relays back to our ISP and the X10 receiver attached to this. I've got goosebumps. Stereo. Go for stereo.
Now, you see that look? That was the look. That's what you want.
He gets that a lot.
So, back before the iPhone, when I started playing with this stuff, things have become cheap. The hardware was really cheap. But still, by the time you connect this stuff, you're basically still just replacing a switch. The paradigm, the user paradigm hasn't changed at all. Now, the thing I discovered, though, is that with some clever programming, and these devices have become quite capable, quite a bit of memory, pretty quick, you could do some very cool things with it. You're not just simulating a switch to turn on and off. You can actually start saying, okay, I want this switch to control these 4 different lights if it's during the day, and these 5 lights if it's at night. Super simple stuff, a few lines of code. So this is really what got me excited about it. And I thought, I'm going to want to have devices replacing everything in the RV. Every light's going to be controlled, every switch will be done and have. So I initially thought cost is going to be very important. So because I'm just going to want a ton of these devices, I don't want to have to think about the cost. I want pro processors and everything. And so I initially started off, I say Nano there, but it was actually the Arduino Pro Mini. Little bitty guy, I bought him out of China for $2 a piece. Looked for, and this was before there were any really affordable internet-connected devices, so I went with the NRF24 radios. Those were about $1 a piece too, so put those together on a circuit board and I got a bill of materials of about $5. So add a MOSFET transistor, turn light on and off. So this got me pretty excited. Now I can start using these things everywhere. One of the things I discovered, the value of having radio connected stuff, is that the cost of the parts was cheaper than to buy a cable to run between a light and a switch. And that really struck me. It's like, oh my gosh, you can do this with a programmable device, and it actually costs less than buying a wire to run. And of course, in an RV, running wire is really hard. They do not make it to add wire aftermarket, so anything that could do that. So one of the things I did was I started putting circuits behind switches, and then these wouldn't actually go anywhere. The receiving lights, LED receiving drivers, would be on another part that would be communicated between the two with the simple RF command. So that really got me thinking differently about problems. Because it's so easy to think, oh, if I want to control that light with that switch, well, I'll run a wire, and you just have to start thinking differently about it. So, but using the Arduino Pro Minis, you still have to be able to connect onto the ports to reprogram it, and I wanted to reprogram a lot, quite often. So the lack of being able to do over-the-air programming was inconvenient. Now, there were some hacks out, and they started coming out where people were figuring out how to do some over-the-air programming with them, but honestly, it was complicated enough to me. I didn't want to spend all my time figuring that out. I really was looking for a simpler solution. But when the iPhone came along, and I became an iPhone programmer, so it was natural to start doing things with the iPhone. As time was going on, the stuff got even cheaper. But still, when I got all done, I was still basically replacing a wall switch with a button on an iPhone. Big whoop, yeah, I love it. It's, the Big Bang Theory kind of thing. Woohoo, it's cool, look at how I did that. But it wasn't really changing things, improving things much. So one of the other things is, as I'm interacting with folks, iPhone programming is hard. It's not something that your average hobbyist wants to learn. Folks can do it. In fact, I publish code out there, and there are people that download it and build it because Xcode's free and so forth. But it's still pretty hard stuff to work with. And that really is unfortunate because iPhones are extremely capable devices. You know, I've started using my old iPhones as control panels in the RV. And you can program these older devices and they're capable of computer vision and audio and video and tremendous calculations. They've got motion sensors built in. It's just awesome. To me, it's just a very powerful device that a lot of people are recycling, throwing away, etc. Now, the current state of IoT at this point, a few years ago, was really quite disappointing. Because commercial solutions were starting to come out, you know, smart things and some of those types of things, but they were expensive. You still ended up having to program it yourself. And a lot of these companies were trying to make it seem like you aren't programming it. So we're going to use if this then that instead of programming. Well, wait, that is programming, right? So to me, it seemed like there was a better way to go with this. So I kept playing, kept trying to evolve this. Then along came the Amazon Echo. When the Alexa was announced, I mean, that immediately lit me up. It's like, oh my gosh, I've been waiting for voice input. I've been playing with voice technology for 30 years or so, and it's always been very unreliable, very difficult, very expensive, required a lot of hardware. Well, along came the Echo, and Amazon announced an SDK for it almost immediately. I think there was like a 3-month period before you could actually program it. And I said, cool, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to jump into this. I'm going to learn Alexa. It was a different language than I was used to. They were working in mostly Node. And I've done some JavaScript programming, but I wasn't comfortable with it. But this was worth my time to dive in and understand it. Because honestly, that had been my dream since 1968, when 2001 came out and the HAL 9000 computer talked to you. You just told it what to do and said, that's where it's got to be. So the Amazon Echo, as I jumped into it, like I said, I was very optimistic initially. The SDK was free, and for some reason I'm a real cheapskate. I'll go out and buy $1 bazillion in parts, but they got to be individually inexpensive. And the tools and stuff have to be free, and they were. But as far as the Echo device itself went, I had very low expectations. Amazon was touting the fact that, oh man, it'll do music, it'll look up the weather for you, it'll do all this other stuff, and I thought, music? I've got a nice stereo, I can do music on my computer. Why would I need a separate device, a monophonic device to do music? I just didn't get it. But I was fired up about the potential for IoT. I could get the toolkit, I could create my own code, I could interface with my own thing. So I jumped in with both feet with it, bought myself an Echo, and started programming with it. Now, the Echo programming is a little bit different, and for some reason they refer to Alexa programs as skills. So there's a whole new set of terminology to learn, but initially there were 2 types of skills. There's a custom skill, and a custom skill is where you define whatever dialogue you want. So for example, with the custom skill, I can say, Alexa, tell me what my bank account is. And then in the back end, you could write code that would go query them. And it would respond, your bank account level is whatever, and so forth. I mean, anything you want, you can have with a custom skill. A second type of skill is the smart home skill. Smart home skill is more something we'd be interested in with IoT, because the smart home skill is made to interact with other devices, and it comes already pre-programmed with the commands you would need to turn things on, turn things off, set a percentage, that sort of thing. So, as I said, the custom skill, you can do anything you want with it, but it requires an invocation word. So, for me to be able to tell Alexa to turn on a light, I would have to create a skill and give it a name like my RV. And then I would have to tell Alexa, tell my RV to turn on a light. And it tends to make the sentences kind of long. You got to get them exactly right, or it doesn't understand. So So you have to predefine every single sentence. You've got to describe exactly what the user's going to say. Now, something you can use for programming, and they refer to them as slots, that's like a variable. So I could say, Alexa, tell my RV to turn on lamp. And lamp would be a variable. I could have different words there. So I could say kitchen lights, patio lights, whatever. And those are exposed into my code as a slot. Now, as I mentioned, the smart home skill is a little more of interest to IoT folks. There's no invocation word required. And at first I thought, well, that's not a big deal, but it really does make interacting with Alexa much more intuitive and easy. So instead you just say, Alexa, turn on the lamp. And because it's a smart home skill, it has the built-in dialogues to understand what turn on is, or turn off, or reduce, that sort of thing. Devices are discovered through a process that they call discovery, and that means that when I build my smart home skill, the engine is going to query me and say, what are your devices? And so I'm going to say, I've got a kitchen lamp, I've got patio lights, I've got whatever, and from then on the user just says whatever they want, turn on, bright and dim, kill, all kinds of different terms for the devices that I've discovered. So smart home skills are very cool, but they're harder to build. You get out there and you look on GitHub and stuff, very few examples of smart home skills because they're tougher to deal with. They also require account linking. Account linking basically says that my skill goes out to your back end, wherever that is. So it might be an Amazon login. The one I used was Particle.io's built-in OAuth to account link with. And that then is how a user would basically log in and establish ownership on those devices. Now, I didn't intend for this to be a monologue, so if you have questions, go ahead and feel free to interrupt me at any point. I'll get distracted and then I'll be mad at you. No, I'm just kidding.
When you mentioned the linking, that it takes the user's password and their login or whatever, does it have to do that each time it wants to go turn something on and off, or does it do it once? And
Great question. It does it once. So when you go open up the Alexa app and you install a new skill that's using account linking, at that time it actually uses a process called OAuth 2 to go out to wherever this source of the credentials is, which in this case is Particle.io. They don't even know what was in it. It's completely out of its hands at that point. And then the Particle.io back end, after you've logged in with your Particle.io account, it will then send a token that the Alexa skill can then use. But it doesn't know what your user ID is, your password, or anything else. OAuth is a very cool system from a security standpoint for that. So yes, the answer is it does it once when you install the skill. From then on, it just runs and it'll be talking to that account.
Even if you power off and power back on.
Yeah, because that's all the back end. That's up in the Alexa in the skies. So let's tell that story again. So now that I've got Alexa in the loop, so I brought Shelley in and I said, Shelley, I think you're going to like it this time. Let's just imagine you're reading a book and it's starting to get dark, and you know the light switch is way over there. But instead of having to get up and walk all the way over there to flip the light switch, all you have to do is say, Alexa, turn on lamp. And so, honestly, you can't get easier than that. I mean, I can't even pull my iPhone out and put my thumb on the thing in the amount of time it takes Alexa to turn it on. Yes?
Yeah, this technology has been around for a while, and it was quicker than Alexa turn on the light.
Lamp on! Lamp on! Yep. The nice thing about the Alexa stuff, of course, is that it's all programmable. I can say, turn on kitchen lights, and depending on what else may be going on and what time of day, it may do something totally different. I mean, the programmability of this stuff is really the key to making it interesting, at least for me.
But you could probably program a clap.
Probably could. Probably could.
But
how do you program like that for different devices?
Multiple claps.
It'd be good around your house.
Well, one of the things that I had initially wanted to do when the Apple Watch came out was I wanted to be able to do that, pointed to light and snap. And unfortunately, it's the first gen Apple Watch didn't have actual accelerometer data that you could get to. I think the new one does. I haven't gone back and re-explored that yet, but that might be cool to be able to just say, turn on, and then you just point at what you want. And that's coming. I mean, that's gonna be here pretty quick.
I remember,
So-
I remember when I first plugged in my Alexa, I said, Alexa, make me a sandwich. She laughed at me. She said, you get your ass off the couch, make your own sandwich. You know where the refrigerator is.
Yeah, one of the things that I think Amazon has been very successful with is keeping Alexa very lighthearted. Because otherwise, you think about it, a computer listening and understanding what you say is kind of creepy. You know? So, in fact, there's one of the skills I looked at for Shelley's birthday, I think, Christmas. I built an Alexa skill for her. And what I did was I got a bunch of the family to do recordings. And then I built a skill that would play with them saying some sort of I love you message to Shelley. And so when she would say, Alexa, play love notes, then it would record randomly one of the kids or parents or relatives or whatever, and they would say something sweet to her and make her cry. I love that kind of thing. So anyways, while I was looking at that, I looked for other apps with the same name, because you try to avoid name collision, because I was going to call this Love Notes. Well, there is a Love Notes, I think that's the name of it, skill that's published out there, and when you play it, it's the voice of Alexa reading love messages to you. And it's just like, ooh, that's kind of creepy. So, anyways. So, the Alexa stuff is pretty darn simple to make simple skills. And they provide a lot of templates. So you can get like a trivia quiz skill downloaded and just change the text. You wouldn't even have to know how to program. That would allow you to do that. But the problem is you reach a plateau pretty quickly. You know, it does what it was intended to do, but what if you want to go beyond that? What if you want to do more complicated stuff? So I started experimenting with it and trying to do things that were tougher because of the way it was built. So one of the first things was context tracking. So typically when you build an Alexa skill, it's sort of an if-then scenario. So if the user says, tell me my current balance, then it will say this. The idea of being able to say, tell me that, yes, okay, tell me more, yes, okay, tell me more, yes, okay, tell me more, that gets trickier to do, because now you're trying to follow context forward. And the Alexa, just like in a web app, they have the concept of session variables that can be passed forward to help you do that. But I didn't see folks doing that, so one of my first skills that I published, the second one I think, is it's the Abbott and Costello Who's On First routine. Now, that routine has about 80 sentences in it. I mean, it starts at the top, and there's 80 go back and forth and back and forth. And a lot of the responses are just who. So I had to build a skill that would keep track of where in the dialogue am I, so that when the user says who, that's actually who being the response to the third statement and not the 42nd statement. So I built that and felt pretty accomplished with it. Then I started to think about, well, maybe I want to play the other part. Maybe I want to interact with Alexa being the straight person. Well, maybe I want to be the funny person. So I've already got all the dialogue in there, so I've set it up to where you could use a startup parameter when you started it, and you play the other side. And so then you run through the whole thing again, only this time you're doing the funny part and it's doing the straight part. And then I figured out, okay, well, now that I've got an Alexa that can do the bud part, and an Alexa that can do the Lou part, the Abbott and Costello parts, can I have them do it with itself? And I did. So I set up, and I call that a duet. And so the skill, if you tell it, if you set up two Alexas, you have to mute one, and you tell the other one, okay, play the baseball skit, duet mode. And then you unmute the other one, and the first thing it says is, Alexa, run the baseball skit in Abbott mode, or whatever. And then the two proceed to go for, could be 20 minutes going back and forth through this thing. And quite often, somewhere along the line, it gets confused and misinterprets something and loops back to the start. You never know what you're gonna get. I think in all of the times I've run it, there's only been once or twice that it's actually made all the way through 80 sentences correctly. So initially, I posted this, this YouTube, and it's, Alexa, open baseball skit. So here I'm doing the straight part. No, I'm sorry, I'm doing the funny part, even though it's not very funny, sorry.
Yes.
I mean, the fellow's name,
Who?
the guy in first,
Who?
the first baseman,
Who?
the guy playing first base.
Who is on first?
I'm asking you who's on first.
That's the man's name.
That's whose name?
Yes.
Well, go ahead and tell me.
That's it.
That's who?
Yes.
Look, you got a first baseman?
Certainly.
Who's playing first?
That's right.
When you pay off the first baseman every month, who gets the money?
Every dollar of it.
All I'm trying to find out is the fellow's name. So it goes on and on and on. And you can tell in that, when I first created, the computer is quite often saying who, which made it tough to swap around without the context stuff. So one of the other things I discovered is that by carefully choosing, getting clever with the invocation name, you can make it sound more natural. So when I would kick off department meetings and stuff, I'd bring Alexa in, and I would create a simple little skill, take me about an hour, and the trigger word for that would be the folks. And so I'd walk in and I'd say, Alexa, tell the folks why we're here. And so it sounded like a natural sentence. Well, tell the folks what we're going to do tomorrow, and tell the folks how we're doing, right? And so it was possible to make it sound like it had better understanding, it didn't have as strict rules as it really did. And that worked pretty well. One of the other things I did in using clever names and so forth, I figured out that I could use two Alexas, two Echo Dots. And for one of my Halloween costumes, I think it was last year before, I went ahead and I put a dot on each of my shoulders. It's just USB powered, so I just had a little battery pack on my back. And I had them on separate accounts, and I wrote two skills named the same thing. And so I would be able to, I think I named the skill in that case, Tell Me. And so I had it sort of playing good, kind of like the scene from Animal House where he's got the devil on one and the angel on the other. And so the white dot always had sort of a nice answer, and the black dot always had sort of a mean, cantankerous answer. And so I would walk around the office on our Halloween costume day, and I'd say, so Alexa, tell me what you think of his costume. And the good one would come right on and say, oh, I think it's sweet, it's very nice. And the bad one would say, oh, he didn't even spend any time making a costume worth a darn, that sort of thing. Right? It's just a lot of fun. There's a lot of flexibility in what you can do just if you get creative. The capability is there. You just got to get a little bit clever about working around the inconveniences. So the other thing was, I was wrong about it. Having put one in the house, and actually several. I got them in every room of the RV. I've got 3 rooms in my RV, and I've got one outside, and I got a couple spares in case I figure out some place to use them. But I found that it's habit forming. You start to use it, and it's like, you know, what's playing nearby? It's easier than pulling out the iPhone and trying to browse to a movie site or that sort of thing. And it just gets very habit forming. I get now to where I ask it questions all the time, and about 50% of the time it answers things that I didn't think it would know. Who's leading the Major League Baseball right now, right? And it'll say, oh, well, in this league we're doing this, and this is doing that. It's like, wow, that's cool. Just very fast. As we're watching movies, I'll ask it, who is the lead character in such and such movie? And sometimes it answers, and sometimes it gives you the standard, oh, I did a search and here's what I found kind of thing. But it happens enough that it's worth my 3 seconds to ask it the question. So I do use it for music. That surprised me. I've got an iMac, and it's got great sound. I've got all my music on it, and I love the way it sounds. But there's times where I'm just waiting for a few minutes to get picked up to go somewhere or do something, and I'll just say, Alexa, play some pop music. And it remembers pretty much what kind of stuff I like, and it's getting smarter and smarter each day. And it sounds good. So,
How does it, oh, I'm sorry.
I have Bluetooth speakers in my bathroom, so it connects to the Bluetooth. And
Nice.
so when I'm taking a shower or a bath, you can play music
Yeah.
whenever I want.
yeah, nice.
So it's nice.
Yeah, the newer ones, well, I think the
Bluetooth speaker lights.
The Dot has the Bluetooth built into it, because it doesn't have good speakers at all.
No.
It's perfectly fine for just voice interaction with it. The Tab, that was the little portable one, it has Bluetooth built into it. And the new one's got Zigbee and all kinds of stuff, so.
How does it know when you say you want to listen to some pop music that it's going to play it from your computer versus from your iTunes account online versus some other way that you have for playing
So
music?
the Alexa stuff is all tied into the Amazon back end, and if you just tell it to play music, it's got some stations that it plays and so forth. You can associate your iHeartRadio account with it and some other things, but generally then you have to tell it, play music from iHeartRadio or those sorts of things.
Yeah, well, how does it know to play from your laptop?
It doesn't. It's
Oh.
playing through the speakers there, or if it's connected to Bluetooth speakers, it's playing it that way.
Okay, so your music library, you can't get to it from this.
No, that's correct. And I haven't spent much time trying to figure out if there's solutions for that. There might be skills that do that. But I just use it for playing whatever it happens to have. And it's got pretty good sets of different genres and so forth. Yes?
You have my AWS account to program.
So to build an Alexa skill requires setting up an Alexa developer, an Amazon developer account, and that's free. And it does require unless you're hosting your own server, which is quite complicated compared to using a Lambda, you do have to have an AWS account. An AWS account requires a credit card, but you don't have to do anything that runs up any fees. So, I've never paid a bill, an AWS bill, but I had to use a credit card to set up the AWS account, which is kind of a shame because it's so easy to jump in and do it. Since the other thing is free, I don't know why they didn't set up a free tier or something.
Yeah, but if your Lambda functions run pretty frequently and run up the consumption, then maybe they'll eventually charge you.
Yeah, I've never
But
gotten charged.
I did that too, but I never paid anything,
Yeah.
but I never commercialized anything. So
Now
if you're calling it millions of times, then you could get.
You certainly could. The other cool thing that they started doing recently, in this past year, is if you have an Alexa skill, published Alexa skill, and you start to incur fees, they will give you $100 credit every month
Yeah.
towards that. It's just cool. So even if I did hit a fee because of some of my public skills, then they probably wouldn't exceed that. The area where some of my friends ran into problems is when they were connecting with DynamoDB. And DynamoDB very easily hits to where you have to pay $1 or $2 a month. None of their bills were ever over $5, but they didn't have 1 million users either. So the other thing that it's not 100% accurate, so it's very good compared to. I was working with voice for many years and it was always terrible, but it misses stuff sometimes, misunderstands. And Shelley and I just scratch our heads and say, what is it talking about? Right? And it butts in sometimes. So in fact, Shelley and I were talking about this upcoming IoT meeting, and I was talking about the kinds of stuff I thought I was going to talk about. And Alexa started off out of the blue and interrupted us and said, okay, here is William Shatner doing the alphabet song. It's like, what? Where did that come from?
Was this after she'd been drinking?
Yeah, I think so.
Probably.
You weren't saying the keyword of Alexa?
Well, we changed the keyword to computer because I'm always talking about Alexa, and that just made it worse, right? But for us Star Trek fans, you know, it's cooler to say, computer, tell me what the weather is. So, once I got the Alexa stuff going, it was back to the drawing board. At the time, I had been using microcontrollers back behind the switches in the RV. I'd exposed and built this iOS app that could be used as a control panel because it's kind of nice. It shows you the state of things. I didn't want to go to the work of put motors behind the switches that when you tell Alexa to turn it on, this thing flips, although that would be cool. So instead I built this app that shows which ones are on and off and so forth. And here we've got the Dot, the Alexa, and these are my early boards I built with Photon. So I switched from the Arduino Pro Mini and RF24s because I needed to be on the internet to communicate with Alexa anyways. So at that point, I took the plunge and moved up to the Photon stuff and added a couple Alexa skills. So at the time, I was calling this stuff Particle IoT because it was all based on the Photon particle. I was using the particle backend, which is free with the Photon, another cool piece of that. And this is sort of the layout. I built a smart home skill. It talked to the Particle IO API, which then talks to the Photon. The Particle API is awesome because you can send it a REST query and say, tell me what devices are on this account. It enumerates through all of them. A lot of nice capability. However, when you get into this environment, and I had an Alexa skill, I had an iPhone control panel app, and I was writing, they call it sketches, of course, in Arduino, writing Photon code, trying to do Alexa skill, an iPhone app, and Arduino sketch all at the same time. I mean, it provides incredible power. I mean, there are things that I can say, okay, well, I'm going to do this decision and logic up here, and I'm going to do this part down here, and I'm going to do this over here. Very, very flexible for home solutions. I mean, I was very excited about doing that, but it's complicated. So, you know, having to create, or in my case, update and maintain an iPhone app, an Alexa skill, and all of the sketches, that's a lot. I mean, that's just a lot to, you know, I have a hard time with the context switch. Man, I can dive into iOS and manage it be going gangbusters, then I can't remember how to compile my Photon stuff. And so I get back to Photon, I work with that, oh yeah, this all really, get this going. I go, how do I do the Alexa stuff? Oh wait, that's a good one. So it occurred to me that it'd be nice if I could build the Alexa piece and the iOS app as just sort of a reusable, don't change it, leave it alone, and provide some information down in the Photon within the sketch that those could read and query and then automatically configure themselves. And that way I could take and I could publish these pieces, and all you had to worry about was writing your Arduino code, your C++ code. So that was kind of where the whole concept of Patriot came about. Now Patriot is just my sort of bastardizing Particle IoT. You smoosh those together and turn it around, and it's just a shorter way of saying that. It's not because I think I'm a patriot, or Photon is more patriotic than something else. So first thing I did was I refactored the libraries, the library that's pulled in on the Photon, to split out the device-dependent stuff. Because I really didn't want folks to have to go in and mess with all of this other, the main part of the library code on the Photon. But you could easily modify one of these. These are fairly simple pieces of code. So you could say, okay, I've got a DHT11 temperature humidity sensor that I'm using, and I want to use the 22, and there might be a couple minor differences. Well, you could easily modify one and then rename it and use that instead. So The other thing was then within the photon code, I exposed the names of the devices and and these are sort of like scenes, I refer to them as activities. What scenes your photon code supports, and then these other things will go ahead and query and read that and work exactly as they are. So because the smart home skill has a discovery phase, that's what it does. It goes out and it looks at every photon that's on your account, and it looks for a published variable called devices are supported, and then it reads those, and after the next time that Alexa does a discovery, and it does that about every 15 minutes, or you can force it by pushing a button, you can say that name and Alexa will recognize it at that point. So I was pretty excited when that started working. So then I thought, all right, so I published the Alexa Smart Home Skill. So it's published, you can load it, anyone can load it on their Alexa, just a minute. But the iPhone app, and this is where, the cobbler's kids have no shoes kind of thing. I'm an iOS programmer, and I haven't published that yet. It's like, why is that? That's the easiest one that I know how to do. But, yeah.
So the Alexa logs on to your Particle account?
No, when you install the Patriot Alexa skill, it uses account linking to let you put your Particle IO login information in.
Right.
And then it will
So it
enumerate.
does log into your Particle IO?
Yeah.
And then it takes the data
Yeah.
and ports it over to Alexa.
Right. And so Alexa will basically, and if you look at logs, or if you're monitoring activity on the part, or, you can look at any point of this, you'll see that Alexa goes out about every 15 minutes and does a discovery to see if anything's new. Well, if you've powered up a photon, plugged it into your account, linked it in with the library, or even just manually expose these variables, Alexa will start to respond to it right after that.
Is there a charge or a fee for that Particle IO cloud thing that you have
Not
there?
currently, not currently. So Particle IO basically subsidizes the cost of their back end in the price of the part itself. So a photon is $19. And at first I balked at that. I thought, I can get an Arduino Pro Mini for $2, but then I got to do my own back end, I got to do my own OTA, I've got to do a bunch of other stuff. So back then, and this was probably 2 or 3 years ago, I just decided, well, wait a minute. Why am I worried about only spending less than $5 for a microcontroller? In my RV, I will probably put at most 20 microcontrollers in there at $20 a piece. I'm looking at $400. Why am I sweating over learning how to do all this more difficult build environment and programming and so forth, and firmware stacks and all of that? When for 20 bucks, they provide all of that. They provide an IDE in the cloud. I can program it very easily. I can mount this thing back behind my switches in the wall if I want, and I don't have to take this back off to reprogram it or update it. It's just all connects to Wi-Fi. So I realized I was being a little bit too cost conscious, penny wise and pound foolish. How much is my time worth, kind of thing. So, yes.
Having all of those devices connecting in that small area, do you ever run into any kind of interference issues?
No, what I run into is hitting limits when I do things like trying to run everything off my iPhone hotspot, which only allows 5 devices. Can't do it. Right? You got a dozen devices in there. You got to have a regular router with a standard number of connectable devices and so forth. So that's one of the issues I've run into with that.
Isn't the Particle LTE or 4G?
I'm sorry, what?
Is the Particle, maybe I'm wrong, but is the Particle device as LTE or 4G or 3G, something like that?
No. Good point. So Particle, as of about a year ago, had 2 main devices, a photon and an electron. The electron is a telephony device, so a cell phone. So you could set it out in your yard, not outside of. If you've got cell tower connectivity, you could put it out in your field monitoring your windmill or something. And they provide a fairly inexpensive cell plan coverage for very, very low data, but you need very, very low data, that sort of thing. I've not played with the electron much. We did a project at work where we were doing some stuff looking at the chlorine levels in pools and stuff, and we didn't want to have to count on connecting to the user's Wi-Fi, so we just did that with the electronic part.
Yeah, the 4G, it looks like they already have it, and the LTE you have to pre-order, and it's coming. You know, they have it in their website, but they don't ship it now. You can pre-order though.
Thank you. Yeah, and the other thing is,
The hologram.
Particles-
The hologram?
What's that?
Hologram.
I'm not sure.
Hologram shows.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
so, and Particle's in the process of updating their whole family of stuff. They're moving to a mesh network, which could make it conceivably much cheaper. The other thing is there are also some knockoffs. I call it knockoff, that's probably a bad term, but there was a part put out a couple of years ago called an Acorn, which basically was a Particle IO compatible part for half the cost. It was $10. I'm trying to remember what it was just
It was a Kickstarter.
a Kickstarter, and I bought a
don't know
bunch
what
of them.
happened to it.
I never could get it to work, so I bricked all of mine, and so at some point I may go back and look at that, but, so, let's see, so we've got, public libraries out there and so forth. So quickly, this is what it looks like going through Particle IO's web IDE. This is it. This is using the Patriot library, which we embed up here at the top. In fact, there's a couple extra statements that aren't needed in here. You basically just define your device, whether it be a light or a switch or a fan, whatever. You add the device, passing it in to the IoT library, we include it up here, and then you can add behaviors. And so your behaviors might be, when the user says photon, I want you to turn light on. You can set up a switch, and here I've got a typo, this should be photon, so that when you flip the switch, it'll turn the light on. And quite often in most of my sketches, I've got, a dozen or so different behaviors, because I'll have 5 different lights that respond with different dimming levels for a given command and so forth. So for example, I can say, turn on awnings, and it'll turn on, I've got 3 different sets of awning lights that all come on at the same time. And I've got a everything command. I want to turn everything off when I go to bed in case I've forgotten. I learned the hard way. Initially, I had all of the Echo stuff set up for each device. So I'd say, Echo, turn on the front awning. Echo, turn on the rear awning. Echo, turn on the ramp awning. Echo, turn on the right trim light. Echo, turn on the left trim light. And then I'm ready to go to bed, and I have to remember, what are all the things I turned on, and what are the names of each of them, right? So I learned that. I learned to appreciate the concept of a scene or a group of different devices. Now you just say, turn off everything, and I don't have to worry about it.
You mentioned this software, this Patriot software that you've written. Where is that available?
It's on GitHub. So the link is in the note that went out. There were like 5 links in there.
Yeah, it's on the Meetup announcement.
Okay.
I'll bring them back up at the end here. I've got a slide. There's also a couple.
I'm gonna go here before you start, so that's why I'm asking.
There's a couple hacks. I'm almost done here, I think. A couple Hackster IO articles that I wrote that kind of go through the details of setting up a Particle account and so forth. So this is basically the steps to build something with Patriot. You got to set up a Particle IO account. Then within the skill, you bring in the Patriot library. Set up the Alexa skill, and that's already published. You can search on Patriot. When you install it, it's going to ask you to log in with your Particle IO account. Then, of course, you have to buy a photon and connect it. One of the cool things I discovered recently is there's a company called Control Everything. Actually, the company's called 3 initials, but their brand name is Control Everything. They sell these boards. They're a little bit pricey compared to building it yourself, but a board like this has 4 relays, and this is actually an expansion board. I can add this to another one. They sell boards that you plug a photon into it. You could then use this code, write it directly to that, and whammo. And 5 minutes later, you've got a set of relays that you can control using Alexa and using an iOS app and so forth. So the last panel, I showed how to edit the code. You can either wait for the Alexa discovery to happen, about every 15 minutes, or in the Alexa app, you can say discover new devices, and it picks it up immediately.
So what happens if the internet goes out?
Excuse me?
What happens when if the internet goes out?
You're out of luck.
Let's say you turn on the lights, it's supposed to turn off, and you tell Alexa to turn off.
Yeah, Alexa says, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble connecting to the internet.
So your lights would stay on for a while.
Yeah, so then your lights are left on until the internet comes back up.
No way to turn it off.
So, do you have some manual override at all that you've set up?
Well, I'll go ahead and get to. So this is the current architecture I'm playing with. And basically what I've done is I've taken the Particle I/O API and I'm paralleling it with an MQTT server. So this is much faster anyways. So if I've got a device like I'm flipping switches or proximity sensors or something, if I go through the MQTT broker, it's just immediate. If I instead go through the Particle I/O API, it's a second or two. I mean, it's very noticeable. And my MQTT stuff will work when the internet goes down. Now, when the internet goes down, Alexa's gone. Nothing you can do about that. So some of the things I've thought about were, well, if I really want voice, there are some offline voice options. Raspberry Pi can run some. So there may be things I look there. I'm thinking at this point, it's like, if I get the basic functionality, and most of it is going to be automated anyways. That's where I'm going with all of this stuff. I don't want to have to tell it every time I turn on a light. I want it to learn that every day when I get home after 6, I come through the front door, I turn on the office light. Pretty soon I want it to know that when I get home after 6 and I open the front door, the office light comes on. I shouldn't have to tell it over and over again. So, but at this point, I also went through the exercise then of adding a SmartThings bridge into it. And boy, what a nightmare. This cost me about 4 months of my life trying to get that to work reliably. I don't know if I'm just an idiot and couldn't quite figure it out, or whether there was just too many moving pieces at this point on all of that. But I never did get to where that was working very correctly. It should, in concept. All the pieces are there. It's talking back and forth. But I suddenly realized that I'm just wasting way too much time trying to figure that out. So,
What is that thing, by the way? Is that 2 pieces of hardware, or is that some software and some hardware, or?
This here?
No, the SmartThings.
So SmartThings is Samsung's IoT solution. It's a hub. So the SmartThings hub, the reason it was attractive to me is because it has both Zigbee and Z-Wave support built in. So whatever devices you happen to have, they sell a kit for like $200 that comes with the hub, a couple door sensors, which also have motion and temperature and so forth built into it, a couple proximity sensors, and a nice little starter kit. So I bought that and played with it. And it is nice, but it's a different language. They're using, what are they using, Go, or some other language I wasn't familiar with. So to me, it just added a lot of complexity without a lot of real value added to it. Oh, they did have nice support for detecting when you're home because your cell phone is back nearby. And they do it very reliably. I like that. So I may eventually have my wounds healed from the previous attempt and give it another attempt with a fresh start. But this stuff needs to be simplified. Something else I did was I added a Node.js command line to interface with all of this. So if you don't like telling Alexa to do it, and if you don't like doing the iPhone, you can get on the computer terminal and say, run this command line, turn this light on. And actually, that's for debugging primarily. I can look at my logs that way and so forth. This is the piece where I'm going. I want to add a Patriot state manager. It'll probably be a Raspberry Pi. And what I want to do with that is that's the piece that I want to be monitoring what I'm doing with it and start to detect patterns and then be able to respond to that. So if I turn on a certain combination of lights, I want it to figure out that, boy, you use this combination of lights a lot. Yes?
Why don't you use AWS or Microsoft Azure for that? You've got a huge cloud that you have available to you, and you can start to look at whatever you got.
The main reason I've avoided AWS, and the only reason actually, is because I really want to get to where everything is running disconnected through just a local MQTT server. I'm in an RV, you know, the odds of me being without internet are great, you know, so that's important to me, and so that's kind of the direction I'm going. So
Okay.
looking at cloud solutions, they would be easier. I mean, Amazon's got some awesome stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very powerful, it's
Mhm.
instant availability
Yeah.
to do a lot of stuff.
And it's cheap, especially as a hobbyist,
Yeah.
like we mentioned, you won't have to pay for it and so forth. So that's mainly the only reason. I'm trying to get to where this stuff will run completely disconnected. So that's sort of the diagram of where I'm at now. An important piece here, and this one I'm excited about. The fact that you can have a smart home skill and a custom skill. And as I said, the smart home skill is great. You can tell it turn this on, turn this off, etc. But there's no dialogue. You can't define a dialogue there. But in the custom skill, you can. So what I'm envisioning is that, like I said, every day I get home, I open the front door, I tell it, Alexa, turn on the office light. I want Alexa to be able to say, I noticed you turn the office light on every time you come home after 6. Would you like me to automatically do that for you? So that's going to require a custom skill to have that kind of capability. And so what I want is to get away from programming, having to do an if this then that kind of thing, and instead have Alexa appear to notice patterns and then suggest, and not just do it automatically, but suggest, do you want me to do this from now on? And that would also give me the ability that if I've set up a group of lights so that when I say turn on awnings, it turns on these 3 different lights, I can use the custom skill and say, Alexa, tell my RV when I say turn on awnings to also include the rear porch light. And boom, from then on, when I tell the smart home skill, turn on the awnings, it's going to include this stuff. So it allows me to modify it in sort of an English-like way.
Since, is it time aware or season aware? In other words, you might want the lights coming on at 6 o'clock in December, but not necessarily in July.
Great point. So sunset plus or minus kind of thing, yeah.
So it can be aware of the day.
Well, it's my
before the
program.
season.
Everything that this stuff is doing is in the back end and typically in my
So
land.
you'd have to program that explicitly.
Yes,
Yes.
locally, you have to put the logic locally.
So, but the intent is, I don't want to have to go in and ever look at my code in order to set up and customize my system with the things it's doing. I
If
want,
you
I
said
want to
sunset plus 1 hour, sunset minus 1 hour.
Yeah. See,
The only problem there is finding out which sunset is this day.
well,
Or you just use the light
that's pretty
sensors.
simple.
You can just request that off the internet.
Yeah.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
thinking there might be a way to do that.
And see, I want Alexa to figure that out. I want Alexa to realize that you're turning on the lights later, like, wait, it seems to be correlated to sunset and not to a specific time of day, that sort of thing. So it's kind of funny, there's been a lot of talk recently about the machine learning, deep learning, and that sort of thing. And actually what I want is shallow learning. Because I don't want, in machine learning, neural networks and so forth, typically you run a set of patterns through this thing 1,000,000 times, and then you provide, feedback to tune the system. I don't want to have to tell Alexa 1,000,000 times when to turn on the light. I want it to figure it out after the 3rd or 4th time I've done it. So the more modern machine learning techniques that I'm reading about out there don't really apply to this, but this also isn't as complicated. I'm not looking for super elaborate patterns. I just wanted to recognize that out of my two dozen different data points, here I see a pattern on this, and then have it prompt for confirmation instead of just automatically doing it. So what's next? That's the coordinated Alexa skill. I want MQTT to be the primary. So I'll basically resolve Particle I/O to be, that's my over-the-air programming updates and so forth. I'll need that to be able to easily determine for my Alexa discovery how many devices I have and that sort of thing. But MQTT will be doing most of the work. And I just absolutely love MQTT. I haven't started playing with it until fairly recently, and it's just I want to start doing more devices. As I mentioned earlier, had on a slide earlier, I don't want to be spending a lot of time doing this and this. I want to be playing with this stuff. I want to be hooking up motors to my blinds to open them and close them and so forth. That's where I want to be spending my time. That to me is fun, making things move, making things change and so forth. In my previous RV, I set up a standing desk with my piano on a drawer underneath it, and then set up stepper motors to open and close when I tell Alexa, let's play piano. And so in theory, the thing would slide out automatically. Well, I'm not as good mechanically as I am programmatically, and it always bound up, and I never quite did get that working, and so I sold the RV and bought a new one. So now we're building some new stuff. So I want to start doing stuff with motion and proximity inputs, you know, like what you guys are talking about. I use the PIR sensors, using ultrasonic sensors. Those are awesome too. I can, especially in small enclosed spaces like in my RV, I can do a ultrasonic sensor in the roof of a bathroom and tell when somebody's gone in and turned the lights on and all of that kind of stuff very easily. Offline Alexa backup. Right, what do I do when Alexa's not there, when the internet's not there? Possibly, there are a couple solutions out there for doing voice recognition. The iPhone, if I've got a fairly recent iPhone in the loop, it's got, iOS 10 came out with some awesome speech recognition. Very, very powerful, very accurate. There's also libraries available for Raspberry Pi, so I don't know, we'll see where that goes. And then this is one that folks have been asking me since I started this stuff, and it's like, $19, man, why don't you use an ESP8266? You can do all of this. So I might get around playing with that. And there may be some solutions where, you know, low-cost parts would be attractive with that. So far it's mainly been a tools issue. You know, if I have to learn too much, then I just start forgetting things. So keep it simple for me. Here's the other one that's really exciting. I mentioned that the iPhone is a very capable device. I mean, OpenCV, there's tons of examples out there. How cool would it be to be able to walk up to your house and it unlocks the door because it recognizes your face, not a face, but your face. OpenCV's doing that kind of stuff. Motion detectors, I got two little chihuahuas running around the house. You know, my motion detectors are gonna be going off all over the place unless I get really creative and so forth. So OpenCV might be an easier way to do that than using PIRs and that sort of thing. Speaking of little chihuahuas, so she's my little helper. And questions? Yes?
Yeah, see, you were talking about doing dialogues, but most of your applications are really turning things on or off. You really don't need a multi-turn dialogue.
That's correct, except for what I was talking about when you're telling it to change its behavior. That's when the back and the forth is important. So if I want to tell it, okay, I've changed my mind. I don't want you to turn on this light when I'm watching TV. Or I want you to change the level from 75 to 25 when I'm watching TV. Those sorts of things.
I have a comment on that too. I think that learning that you want to incorporate is harder than you think.
I'll bet you're right.
Because we worked on it the last year and a half. It's harder than you think.
So one of the things I've found is it's important to shape the solution domain based on what technology will allow.
Yeah.
So yes, I say I want to be able to do all of this stuff. If I can do half of it easily, then I'll go for that half.
I think for your things, if you have some kind of event-based system, if you can just recognize those events, maybe you just need to write the logic to say when these events happen. It's some kind of rule-based system. So when you wanted to do additional things, like when you walk in, you wanted to turn something on, just add an additional rule. Just have a rule-based system where you have some conditions and actions. You have the capability to recognize the conditions. You have the capability to carry out the actions. You just need to connect them with a bunch of rules.
And I want the code to write its own code.
I know. That's
Sounds kind of like Westworld, doesn't it?
That's the AI dream, but they're harder.
You mentioned you might look into using the 8266. Can you?
And I'm I'm using that term generic. What I mean is just a low-cost microprocessor.
Oh, because I was curious if you could use that with that particle I/O.
No, but the MQTT stuff, it would work.
It would work with that.
You'll get-
That's another reason for going with the MQTT.
On the smart homes integration,
Uh-huh.
do they, I guess a first curiosity is, what was the problem, what did you have trouble with? I have a smart home.
With
system.
smart things,
Yeah, I have a smart things hub and Arduino Shield.
it was like every time I turned around, I was stubbing my toe on something. One of the issues I ran into was the fact that each of those smart things, and I have a Harmony hub, and I was using smart things to talk to the Harmony hub. It's got an Alexa interface, the smart things has an Alexa, and then I've got my own Alexa. And so I realized that, wait, I gotta figure out one of these is gonna be the champ and talk to these devices. And so it got very confusing for me, keeping all of this stuff straight. So I think that was most of my problem, it's just the confusion. I think it's all doable. It was overwhelming to me.
You also mentioned that the smart things hub, I assume the hub, or maybe there's another device that you're telling when you were in the house based on your phone.
The smart thing hub does that.
Is it doing that by recognizing the Wi-Fi and the MAC address, or is it looking at Bluetooth, or?
I'm not sure which it's using. I think it's connection to the internet. You're running an app on the phone that it's looking for, the Smart Things app, I think.
Oh, okay.
I've looked at writing my own beacon codes and doing stuff like that, and that's a possibility too. And there again, it gets to where the complexity is becoming more than I want to do. I'm trying to offload to something else that's figured out how to do it well. You know, it's like the GPS stuff. iPhone GPS is extremely complicated and extremely problematical. It works sometimes in a well-defined set of cases and just acts very poorly in some others. You know, in concept it's wonderful, but trying to actually get something to work reliably is very tough. So I'd rather let somebody else figure out that part.
Hey, have you run into any security issues with Alexa? I just have an innate distrust of things going out to the internet
So,
every 2 minutes.
I have a couple good friends that express that to me over and over again. And one of the nice things about Alexa, as opposed to some of the other solutions out there, is Alexa does not stream to the cloud until you trigger it with the wake word. So it's not constantly listening and then encrypting and sending your audio up to the cloud to analyze. It's not sending a thing until you say.
So they say, do you trust them?
Yeah, that's
Well,
what I was thinking.
you can put a network sniffer on there and see. I believe it. I've not done that. I've not verified it, but I work with enough guys that would have checked that.
I think the saving grace there is how big Amazon is. They can't risk their entire business on a mistake like that. So they won't. But a third party or some other company that's a smaller company making a device like that, you should have serious concern.
Yeah.
But I don't think you should be too concerned about it. They could at any time send an update down that would cause it to deliver voice data continuously.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't know. But as soon as they got caught, it would destroy them.
Yeah, see, and Amazon has been so lucky in establishing this market. They really haven't executed all that well. I mean, when I brought down the first SDKs, and over the first year, they updated the SDKs with incompatible updates and stuff, and it was a nightmare. You go find a tutorial on how to do something, it's totally wrong because it's all changed. And, I mean, from that perspective, they've just done a terrible job. But what they have there and the functionality is so seductive that I'm willing to jump in and figure out the differences and figure it out myself, knowing that I can't rely on the older tutorials and blog posts and things like that.
When you're having trouble with the smart things, did you try to contact them to see if they had solutions?
I did.
And were they responsive?
I got sort of a boilerplate, no, we don't do this.
I had the opposite. They actually pestered me to death. When I got that shield, I went their instructions and it was wrong. They didn't work. So I contacted them through their GitHub, and I actually got in and issued a trouble ticket, issue with their software, and then I just got flooded.
I probably went the wrong channel then, because I went into
begged me
their
to be part
customer
of their
support on the
development team.
hub and asked about the availability of certain APIs and capabilities, and the answer I got back was just you could tell the person didn't know, so they were just, no, we don't support that. Right?
Yeah. Well, these guys wanted me to help them figure out how to make it work. Now, they didn't know who I was. some hobbyists as far as they needed, but they couldn't make their examples work.
Yeah, the one I was impressed with was Harmony support. You know, Harmony makes the box that controls your TV and stereo and all that. And I was having trouble getting that work with my RV Unique television, which is probably some real low budget thing. And they were really good. They got me online and they did a bunch of patches to make it work with my TV on the back end, and it just started working. And
Wow.
that was, I was surprised, very surprised.
Yeah.
Are you trying to wind us up?
Okay.
Okay, so I've got a few of my early and progression of circuit boards and things I built here, and just some show and tell stuff if you're interested. If you have questions, I'll be sticking around for a little bit and be glad to answer your questions.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.